Hello everyone and welcome to I think session 9 of our Tarot on live videos here in the Tarot Professionals Facebook group, which is allied with the Tarot Association at www.tarotassociation.com, and we are broadcasting live in the midst of the pandemic of 2020. Just locally, here in Keswick, where I live in the UK, in the Lake District in the UK, our Prime Minister about 30 minutes ago announced a total lockdown on travel, shopping, any non-essential premises were to close. And so we're following the rest of Europe in that regard. So I went out earlier on. If you take a look at my Facebook page, I've got some public posts where I have taken photographs of the town that I live in here, and like many towns around the world, it is absolutely empty. I could hear my own footsteps, and the weirdest thing was I could hear birds as well. Wherever I went, I could actually hear the bird song. So hello everyone around the world. Welcome to this campfire, this virtual campfire in the midst of one of the most fundamental changes our society has seen for probably in our living memory, for better and for worse. So please feel free to comment on, for the historical record, comment on your own local situation in the chat window as well. So what we're going to do today, this might be quite a short session. I'm not quite sure yet, because I'm still trying to get my head around some of our local issues and what that means to daily life. What I'd like to do is we're obviously going to read from our bedtime story from The Wake World by Alistair Crowley. I just want to briefly explain where we've got to on the Tree of Life. We're also going to take a look today, not a tarot card reading. We're just going to skip tarot card reading itself. Specifically today, so if you're only interested in reading the cards, then you can safely skip this session. But for those of you that want to stay, what we're going to do will actually help you read the cards far more deeply, far more proactively, and also give you a lifetime of exploration as well. And I promise you that what I'm about to do with you today is, for me, it took about 4 years, almost daily practice of my time and attention, and I got a lot of value out of it, and I still return to it even to this day 40 years later. So I'm hoping that we can cover something of interest and potentially for your self-discovery and interest in the coming days, weeks, months and years. So with our Tree of Life then, in our Wake World story, we faced the devil, death and the path of the arrow, temperance, and we talked briefly before about there being 4 worlds of the Tree of Life and what that meant in terms of tarot reading. Always go literal. And we also talked about the formula of Kesheth on the bottom of the tree and the arrow going up. Then we had to face the devil and death, and rather horrific descriptions by Crowley in his metaphor of spiritual ascent of the Tree of Life. Because at the veil and at the abyss, there are 2 fundamental crises of identification that we go through on the way to our enlightenment or our unification with the universe and our losing of a sense of separateness. So the first one is the veil, and the second one is the abyss that is here. And this map is replicated in all traditions. So whether you read St Bonaventure, St John of the Cross, whether you read Da Free John, contemporary Western Eastern mystic, whoever you read, you can always find this pattern because it is a universal pattern, a bit like the hero's journey might be considered to be a universal pattern, but this is a universal pattern as well. So today in our story we're going to enter the Palace of Gold, Tifreth. It means beauty on the Tree of Life, and it is underneath strength, justice and the hermit, this triad here. And quite often with Kabbalah, one of the best ways of studying it is in pairs, because Hesed and Geborah operate as a pair, and you can't look at one without really looking at the other. And the image of strength is between them. So strength is above beauty, and that's why Crowley said, love is the law, love under will. And what we have is strength is the lady and the lion. Now, strangely enough, the lion is actually Hesed, which means mercy or loving kindness, and the lady is actually Geborah, which means rigor, strength, might, and so forth, and is associated with Mars. So it may seem counterintuitive, but actually Hesed, love and loving kindness, is like this big sea, this big blue sea of love that would swamp the entire universe and never stop. So Geborah, rigor or might, sometimes it's called pakad, meaning fear, has to constrain it, has to hold it, give it some structure. So this is all expansion, and it's higher up the tree, so it's a massive expansion of energy, and it's constrained over here. And you can see that strength then holds that together, like in a fundamental dynamic, in the same way that the blasted tower holds Netzach and Hod together at a slightly lower level. And we can see these patterns in the world. Dion Fortune said something very interesting, that the main problem with human society at the moment is that we have made Hesed passive and Geborah active, and they should be the other way around. Geborah, strength, should be passive and receive the loving mercy and kindness of Hesed, which should be expansive. But in our society we tend to think of strength and might as being active and dynamic and go-get-em, and love as being something receptive and passive. But actually the tree models it the other way around, and it says that love is the active principle and might should be the passive response to it. There's a good book on neurology called The Feeling of What Happens, and that particular book shows how we feel things as they arise, and that feeling is a sort of response to things, and that happens at a neurological level. So Kabbalah got there first by observing that, but our society has switched those around, and we glorify might and power as a very dominant active thing, when in fact technically it should be love and mercy and kindness that are proactive, that are active, that are dynamic, that are forceful on this side of the tree. And Geborah should be passive. We should only use might and strength when we need to constrain too much love and kindness, which sounds a very utopian ideal. But Dion Fortune has a really fascinating analysis of that. All you need is love. That's exactly right for Hesed. And Dion Fortune in the Mystical Kabbalah has I think it's on her chapter on Hesed or Geborah. It's one of those two, and she has a fascinating analysis of this very thing as it applied to the world at her time that still applies even now. And she was way ahead of her time in studying psychoanalytical approaches as well. There is a book by Dion Fortune under her real name, Violet Firth, called The Machinery of the Mind, and that is a book about psychotherapy that is way ahead of its time, way ahead of its time. And Dion Fortune was quite a remarkable woman and person for a dynamic approach, and the magical approach and the mystical approach and the spiritual approach were all one and the same. And she really popularized the use of psychotherapy and psychology within the occult. And then Israel Regardie also developed that approach, unlike, say, for example, Waite, who was an out-and-out mystic, and Crowley, who was a sort of auteur at psychology, and had a sort of brute force understanding of it, but it wasn't his specialism really. He went for magic. So you then had Dion Fortune for the psychology, Waite for the mysticism, and Crowley for the magic. And in those three you can find some triangulation of a good way up the tree of life. Okay, so that's where we're going to head shortly in our bedtime story. But today I wanted to talk and give you a demonstration, well, a sort of intro really, to pathworking with the tarot. And I have to keep doing things like this in order to hopefully get a good screenshot for Facebook, because it randomly selects some. I don't know if it's a scene where I'm not moving or where one is not moving that Facebook decides is going to be the screenshot. But if I hold things like long enough and look slowly enough, I'm wondering if that's where it takes the screenshot. So we'll see. It's usually when I've got one eye closed, one eye open, and my tongue stuck out. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover a brief guide to pathworking from a theoretical point of view, and I'm going to give you an exercise to do that is really useful, that I found really useful when I was about 14 and I was first learning the tarot. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the inner guide meditation, and I'm going to give you some insight as to why this is one of the, for me at least, in terms of tarot and Western esotericism, one of the most important tools that I've experienced in the last 40-50 years. And it's got some problems with it, which we can discuss in a lot more detail along the way, but I think it's really a powerful modern contemporary technique, and worth its weight in gold if you want to study tarot from a esoteric point of view. Okay then, so what I would want to start with is this whole term of pathworking, astral travel, lucid dreaming, creative visualization, inner guide work, shamanic journeying. They are all the same but different. They are all the same but different. They all apply really to Yesod on the tree of life, in my view of the model anyway. And that is because they all involve a closed eye, usually visualization technique, where we go inside and we experience a state of being that has a very different quality to our normal everyday reactions. So that's basically all of those systems work in this same area. But the reason I'm still holding this up, just to explain, is that pathworking should only be done on the paths of the tree of life. And I wanted to make that very clear, even though it sounds a bit weird and technical. There are books, and I've got a load down by my side for something that I'm writing for the Magister books at the moment, like First Steps in Ritual, Pathworking, Magical Pathworking, Eye Magic, all The Shining Paths by Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki. All of these books have written guided meditations like close your eyes, there is a gate ahead of you, you walk down a path, to your left there is a tree, to your right there is a gate, you go through the gate, you go down the steps, blah blah blah. Now, some of those books do include pathworkings for Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, Netzach and the Sephiroth, as if you can visualize your way up the Tree of Life. And so in Malkuth you visualize a temple and you have 3 doors ahead of you, and you go up this path and that's the Last Judgment, and you visualize scenes that relate to that card. But here's the thing that I want to make absolutely clear as far as I'm concerned, and it might save you a lot of time over the years if you follow this particular route. When we're reading Crowley, you'll see that he describes these as palaces, and these are sort of corridors and paths and so on. There's a very distinct difference between the Sephiroth as paths and the paths as paths. And the reason is this: these in Kabbalah, in our mental map, are unknowable. We cannot know what these are. We cannot know what they are. And the map says that we should have a map where we don't know what these are. We only know them because of the paths in between them. So we only infer them through what we see. It's a bit like inferring gravity by the fact that things fall down. That, and I know this seems a bit technical, but it is important if you bear with me for a moment, that what happens is we learn about the nature of Hod, whatever that is, and we know it must be there because of the way the universe works, but we don't quite know what it is. It's sort of part of the divine underpinning of the universe. So what we have to do is we have to make decisions. It's a bit like not knowing what your mind is really. You can analyze a brain, but you won't find your mind in there. You just find lots of squidgy bits of brain matter. So we infer that the mind is in there, but we don't know it by making judgments, by reanalyzing what we're doing, by having the devil whisper in our ear, by sacrificing our higher values when we make decisions, and so on and so on. But we can't really know what mind is, and it would be very egotistical to assume that we did. And this is the problem when people say, oh yes, well, I have journeyed across the abyss. What they mean is they've imagined in their head that they have done something up here. And what they've done is they brought this bit, all of this bit, down into their imagination. And there's a lot of people who meander around having done all of these sorts of things, but it's only within one state of mind. It's only within their imagination. And that's fine to begin with, but these are very different states. They are not imagination. They are very different states of awareness and being and resultant action that then flow from them because you're in a different position on the tree. So it's very important to enlarge your mind to comprehend the mysteries and not cram the mysteries into the size of your mind. And a good habit is not to imagine that you can pathwork Hod or pathwork Tiferet or anything else. It's just nice mental discipline. It's a good habitual pattern that you have these blanks, because later on in the spiritual system it's very important for certain things to happen to not have anything in these spaces. If you have pre-existing beliefs in these, then you're likely to drag yourself back down here without needing to. That you can allow the lightning flash to elevate you up further because you've got nothing in these, rather than if you imagine you filled them all, what you're doing is filling in this, and then it blocks anything really coming through you, if that makes sense. So it's just a technical thing, but I like to say it up first because it's really important later on for me, as part of my teaching, that I say it, that people know, because then I don't have to, if someone studies with my work, then I don't have to undo something 3 years later that they've set up accidentally without even knowing it. Okay, now, so there we go. So right, the inner guide meditation then is basically a Yesodian sort of thing. It belongs down here, where we work with our psychological being. And the Inner Guide Meditation, the book is very good. A lot of it is basically questions and answers. There's a big section of questions and answers that are useful if you're actually doing the meditation itself. It's a closed eye meditation. It can be written down literally on one page, and basically it follows a shamanic model where you close your eyes, you visualize a certain scene, you go through it in a certain way, you meet an animal, then the animal takes you to your inner guide, and that inner guide usually stays with you for a good couple of years of work. And sometimes you move on to another guide, but that is a bit irrelevant. You can continue with one guide, it's perfectly fine. So the Inner Guide Meditation takes you through that system, and you can use your inner guide for just about anything, and that's the beauty of this method. Also, you can get some very magical results through doing the inner guide, because one of the important things about this method is it teaches you that the relationship between what goes on in here and what goes on out there is a little bit more tangled than we might think. There is really no inner and outer once you start working with systems like this. It starts to break down that division that we've had between here's us, here's the outer world, and here's our model of the world. The world card sits on that path. As we move up and start the inner guide meditation, we start to access the higher bits as a result, and then apply those down into the world around us. So you can get some weird results by doing the inner guide meditation to make magical change in your life that has a non-causal relationship. There's no relationship between doing a particular visiting a magical tree with a unicorn in your inner guide meditation and your next door neighbour stopping late night parties, but sometimes those things can be very much related, and the inner guide meditation gives you a safe method for working with it. Okay, and I just wanted to demonstrate something else with the inner guide meditation. The really cool thing about the inner guide meditation is that it is tarot based. It's tarot based, and it's astrologically based. Now, I don't agree entirely with some of the astrology that's in here, and I worked with Lynn Birkbeck to clarify some of the experiences over the last 30-40 years with that, just to tweak the astrology a bit. I also talked to Steinbrecker's nephew, who had sort of inherited some of the work after Steinbrecker died, and discussed it with him. And I stand by the sort of astrology approach that I've applied to it. I think it's just tweaked it ever so slightly. But the brilliant thing with the method is that you can take your natal chart, your birth chart, which basically gives you your grand plan for who you are and how you're going to relate to the universe, and make it active through the correspondences of the tarot cards. And what Lynn and I did is create a workbook. It's about 40 pages that actually plugs your natal chart, or one's own natal chart, into the inner guide meditation, and you end up with a tarot card that will represent your guide, and then some core work to do with your sun and moon locations. There's the sun in Virgo, and the moon, the high priestess, in Scorpio, for example, if we have the death card. So you have to know your correspondences. And then also we have the rising signs, the dynamics, the optimization, sun and moon, and then shadow work down at the bottom as well, in sort of triads and pairs depending on your chart. And what this does is it identifies the niggles in your chart, or the dynamics, the core dynamics, and translates them into tarot, so that you could then go into your inner guide, space. You can follow the method and then ask the inner guide to take you to the Sun and the Hermit, for example. And then you can have a whole experience working with the Sun and the Hermit, and in effect, through correspondence, you're working with your own personal astrological layout and tightening the connections and smoothing them out and balancing them out and things like that. It provides you an actual dynamic workbook to work with your own chart. And the workbook that we provided also provides the method. I know this sounds a bit of a sales pitch, but we're very proud of it because we've managed to condense a lot of this and hundreds and hundreds of hours of working with it into a little workbook that you can then use personally to go on your own way with it. But before you do that, I wanted to give you a quick method and then we'll have our bedtime story. The method I used to use when I was first reading tarot is this. What you need to do is be able to close your eyes, and this is very good as well if you are very able to do this. You can do it with a new deck. It's very good for learning a new deck as well. I'll give the links to the workbook. It's on Lynn Birkbeck's site. Yes, it is at the moment. And I'll put a link to this book as well. You can get this second hand now, usually, I think. It's still in print and there are different versions of it. But the workbook explains where we've tweaked the astrology just a little bit. Well, quite a major way to begin with, but then in a few little bits as well. I also disagree with Steinbrecher in that he says that the first guide is always male, and if it's ever female it's a mistake and you need to keep working until you find your first guide. I've done this with people, individuals, young people, new age groups, events, probably for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and there have been some very valid female first guides. Not always, it is a majority male, but I've done blind tests on it and I do disagree slightly with him on that as well. So what your practice is very simple. Is what you do is you close your eyes and then you visualize the Fool card in your mind, and you try and imagine as much as you can about the Fool card in the deck that you're thinking about, for example the Thoth or the Waite-Smith. And then what you do is you then go on to the Magician, and inside your head you visualize the Magician and you see what you can see, the colors, the shapes, what the character is wearing, what the other items are, the background and everything else. And then you go on to the Empress, the High Priestess, then the Empress, the Emperor, Hierophant, Lovers and so on, and you work through the deck as far as you can in your imagination. In the morning you wake up and you take a look at your deck, you keep it by your bed, and you look at the cards and you try and compare what you remembered about them with what's actually on the card. And what you have to do is be able, over depending on the deck, over a week, maybe 2 weeks, do them in batches, like go through all of the pentacles, go through all of the swords, go through all of the cups, look at all of the cups cards carefully over the day like you're revising for an exam, then put them away, and then at night close your eyes and try and go through every cup card until you can do the whole deck. So you have to be able to close your eyes and then very slowly go, right, that card, that card, that card, that card, that card. Then open your eyes in the morning when you wake up, look at the deck and be fairly happy that you've got the whole deck inside your head. That's a really useful, good, simple, but quite difficult over time, particularly with a new deck, visualization exercise. But it automatically strengthens all of the skills you need to visualize. One final thing on visualization is you don't have to see it visually. There are a lot of people who, when they visualize or imagine a scene, they don't really see it. Some people might feel it, some people might hear it, some people, like myself, I tend to have a slight visual, but a lot of mine is quite abstract. So if you said to me, what am I seeing? I could say, well, it's a door, it's very ancient, it comes from an old castle, it's got grooves down, I can see the black bolts in it and stuff like that. Some of that I can see, but the rest I've just got the feeling of. And when you ask me to describe it, it will always be the same description. I'm not making it up differently new each time, but I am seeing in an abstract way that particular door. So don't be terrified if you can't visualize something. If you can imagine it, that's just as good. You don't have to imagine things in the visual language all of the time. That's just a preferred method that most people have when they see something inside their head. I see what you mean is an example of when people say, oh, I see what you mean. They really do see what you mean. But when someone says, I get you, or that feels good to me, they might not see what you're talking about, but they feel it. And that's good enough. When you close your eyes, you don't have to see things. You can just imagine them. So I tend to use the word visualize, but it's a bit lazy and I shouldn't do, and I encourage other people not to. The best way to say it is to imagine inside your head a garden. You can have a feeling of that garden, you can explore it, it can be very stable inside your imagination, but you may not see a single bit of it, but it is just as real in your imagination as someone who can picture every flower and petal and detail, because really people can't. They see what they think is a garden, then when you ask them about the petals, then they see the petals, but they weren't seeing the petals before. They were just representing a garden as a big abstract sort of picture. Okay, makes sense? So that's a good exercise to start with, and then we'll come back to some sort of pathworking ideas at a later point. And as Simon's saying, he struggles to visualize things clearly. You don't have to visualize things clearly. Clearly is a descriptor of a visual sense. You know, it's clear or unclear, clarified or not clarified, like distant, near, and things. What you have to do is find your preferred way of, as Diane's saying, internalizing your imaginary world and being able to work with it in some sort of dynamic communication that you can feel and think about, and that's really all you need to establish, some sort of means of communication that doesn't have to be visual. Okay, so we'll be coming back to that, and over the next few days we can do some straightforward tarot card reading techniques and a few other things, but if people have got questions, and I'll put links in and stuff over the next day or so. It looks like we're on complete lockdown now, so there'll be plenty of time for us all to discuss these things. So we had got to the 6th house. And Lola Daydream, so for those who are new here, we're reading through The Wake World, a metaphorical fairy tale by Aleister Crowley in his little collection Contes on Pax. And this is the story of Lola Daydream, who is being taken up the Tree of Life through tarot cards, and I'm reading it just on the grounds of encouraging people to see tarot. This is a really obvious example of where tarot is being used, but over time we'll look at some other examples where it's not that obvious that tarot is being used, but it's underneath the hood. So Lola described about the previous path and the palace, Netzach. The further you get in, the harder it is to say what you mean, because it all has to be put into dream talk. And of course the language of the wake world is silence. So, never mind. Let me get on. We came by and by to the 6th house. I forgot to say that all these three paths were really one, because they all meant that things were different inside to outside, and so people couldn't judge. It was fearfully interesting, but mind you, don't go in those passages without the fairy prince. And of course, there's the veil. I don't think I'd better tell you about the veil. I'll only put your mouth to my head and your hand there. That'll tell anybody who knows that I've really been there, and it's all true what I'm telling you. The sixth house is called the Treasure House of Gold. It's the most mysterious place as ever you were in. First, there's a tiny, tiny, tiny doorway. You must crawl through on your hands and knees, and even then I scraped ever such a lot of skin off my back, and then you have to be nailed on a red board with 4 arms and a great gold circle in the middle, and it hurts you dreadfully. Then they make you swear the most solemn things you ever heard of, how you would be faithful to the fairy prince and live for nothing but to know him better and better. So the nails stopped hurting because, of course, I saw that I was really being married. And this was part of it, and I was as glad, and at that moment my fairy prince put his hand on my head, and I tell you honour bright, it was more wake up than ever before, even than when he used to kiss me. After that they said I could go into the bride chamber, but it was only the most curious room that ever was, with 7 sides. There was a dreadful red dragon on the floor, and all the sides were painted every colour you could think of, with curious figures and pictures. The light was not like dream light at all. It was awake light, and it came through a beautiful rose in the ceiling. In the middle was a table all covered with beautiful pictures and texts, and there was ever such strange things on it. There was a little crucifix in the middle, all of diamonds and emeralds and rubies and other precious stones, and there was a dagger with a golden handle and a cup full of the most delicious wine, and there was a curious coin with the strangest writing on it, and a funny little stick that was covered in flames like a rose tree is with roses. Beside the strange coin was a heavy iron chain, and I took it and put it round my neck, because I was bound to my fairy prince, and I would never go about like other people till I found him again. And they took the dagger and dipped it in the cup, and stabbed me all over to show that I was not afraid to be hurt, if only I could find my fairy prince. Then I took the crucifix and held it up to make more light in case he was somewhere in the dark corners, but no. Yet I knew he was there somewhere, so I thought he must be in the box. For under the table there was a great chest, and I was terribly sad because I felt something dreadful was going to happen. And sure enough, when I had the courage, I asked them to open the box. And the same people that made me crawl through that horrid hole and lost my fairy prince and nailed me to the red board took away the table and opened the box, and there was my fairy prince, quite dead. And we'll leave it at that point for now. For those who are interested in that section, it is a metaphorical description of the Adeptus Minor ritual of the Golden Dawn, a ritual that Crowley himself would have experienced and rewrote to be an actual ritual. You weren't actually nailed on a cross, but close to it. And we're seeing there the story of Christian Rosencreutz and the Rosicrucian mysteries adapted through the Golden Dawn and through prior Freemasonry into an actual ritual. The vault with the sides and the pictures is a real vault that some temples actually have, and the initiation ritual is similar to what Crowley is describing for Lola, with some variations for the story. So we will continue our journey of the Tree of Life and through these mysteries as we go on, and we will look forward to hearing what you have to say about your visualizations and practice of that. And I'll put the links to the Inner Guide Meditation and Inner Guide Meditation Workbook in the Facebook as well. If you're watching this as a recording, hello to you, and thank you for watching this. And I look forward to talking a little bit more as we go along. We'll come back to this. We're going to get back to some straight tarot card reading for the next few days. We have plenty of time, so we're going to use it to our best advantage. Thanks a lot, everyone. And any questions, pop them in the thread, and just look out for yourselves. Someone had posted a poster. You can see it on my personal wall, on my public post. Someone had posted in a shop window that that they'll be back soon. In the meantime, be kind, be generous, look after each other, and see you on the flip side. So see you on the flip side.